It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
A recruiter from NASA came to my campus and talked about, come work for us in the space program, and we've got, all these German scientists and Wernher von Braun, and of course, because I was a kid not too many years before and saw Wernher von Braun on Wide World of Disney, I said, I know who this man is, and I'm interested.
There were many people across NASA with skills and capability and expertise. It was a young crowd, but we also had the von Braun team here of some 200 experts in rocketry that had proven engineering development techniques.
Well, I was an electrical engineer, so simulation work is where you write programs that predict how well real systems will work, and that was what they employed me to do. And I worked for the group that was working on the control system for Saturn as it was lifting off.
Well, I'm an electronics man. I was responsible for the electronics on the Apollo program, the Space Shuttle program, the Hubble telescope, and things like that.
My career spanned 50 plus years, so I was an early member of the von Braun team. I came here in 1956.
Well, when we first started out, we were working about 10 hours every day. We were trying to supposedly catch up with the Russians, and we worked really hard. We didn't know a lot about what we were doing, but once we caught up with the Russians, it slowed down a little bit.
They were 10-hour-a-day weeks during the week. Weekdays was 10 hours every day, and Saturdays was 8-hour days. So we worked 58 hours a week on a crash program.
A lot of times when we were designing electronics, we would get a circuit or something working fine, and we would shut off the power for the night and come in the next morning and turn it on, and it wasn't working.
Calculations were done with desktop calculators. They were just a keyboard. You just punch your numbers in and pull a lever to either add, subtract, multiply, or divide.
We used computers back then that were not anything like today. Your cell phone has far more computing power than just about all the computers we had at the center. It's hard to believe, how really poor our computers were back then.
And we wondered at the time whether this possibility of space travel was feasible, because how in the world are we going to make sure that the guidance system doesn't quit and nothing to start it.
It was not like it is. It's too easy today.
Wernher von Braun was a very easy man to talk with. He would come down and ask to be shown how the thing works. He was very interested in details, and yet he could talk about stuff that I had no idea about that they were thinking about. So he was a very humble man, I would say, and a person with a big picture, but interested in details and made you feel good.
So when we completed our presentation to Dr. von Braun, I was prepared to get questions I couldn't answer. But his only question was, well, how much does this system weigh? So I told him what our guesses were. And he wasn't probing to see if we knew our business, he was trying to figure out what launch vehicle he wanted to put this on. So if he could figure out some launch vehicle he could put this on, particular one that he built, he would be interested in flying this. So it was not a grilling. He was figuring out how to help us. And that was his nature.
And he was talking to our lab director, Dr. Walter Hauserman, and he just said, well, I'd like to go see where this study is being done, and I wasn't really expecting to present, nobody was. So we went this mad rush of picking up coffee and cleaning the coffee rings off the desk and straightening up. And he came down about 15 minutes later, and very, very personable. He greeted everybody, and I have to admit that he asked me better technical questions than I think some of my managers could have.
He could discuss pretty near any subject with any person of expertise long enough to get out of that discussion what he wanted to get out of that discussion. And he was excellent at chairing a conference of engineers with varying expertise and varying opinions to drive a difficult problem to a decision.
I stated in the lab, we saw it, but the watch party was in 4400, which was the headquarters of NASA there, and that Marshall Space Flight Center, and that's where the watch party was.
I went with a bunch of people, young adults from my church. We went to Gunnersville and camped out there, and I brought my little Sony 9-inch portable TV that I could plug into my cigarette lighter. And when the big moment came for Neil Armstrong to jump off, it was nighttime here, of course, and there must have been 100 people gathered around my little TV looking at it, and I mean, it was quite a scene.
It was my good fortune to travel to Kennedy Space Center, Florida, for the Apollo 11 launch. So we had a fly-by-wire system on that lunar lander. Armstrong was supposed to just grab the joystick and drive it on in there, and he couldn't find a level landing space. So he kept flying sideways till he found one. He almost ran out of fuel before he did. But when he set her down there and then jumped off that lunar landing gear leg with his quip about one small step for man, it's a sigh of relief. It was a sigh of relief that all systems worked.
We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things. Not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone.
Guidance is internal. 12, 11, 10, 9. Ignition sequence starts. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff.
Well, I would say it was a very informal, enjoy, a lot of fun is what I always wanted to do as an engineer. We worked with everything. They gave us the tools.
And you just put your shoulder to the wheel and you got your work done because you knew other people were depending on it.
They gave us the project and said, it's got to be ready in 18 months. And you may not think that that's fast, but for the government, everybody said, we'll never make that. But we did, and they flew in 18 months.
I think because we were in an international competition, at the time, that was, I think, a big thing that we were thinking about. Well, we beat the Russians, but in years since, I think about it in terms of, how 1,000 years from now, people will say, well, okay, there was Christopher Columbus, there was this, there was the lunar landing, and to have even had a small part in that, and even though you're anonymous as far as history is concerned, just to know that you were part of that, I mean, it's kind of a neat feeling.